The legal fight to save a Tamil family from deportation will resume in Melbourne's federal court this morning. Supporters for the family, who've been living in the regional Queensland town of Biloela, are calling on the Home Affairs Minister to stop the planned deportation, but the government says they are not refugees and should not be given special treatment. Karina Ford is the family's lawyer and joins me from Melbourne. Karina Ford, thank you very much for joining us today. In your recent discussions with the family, can I ask how they're doing?
They were obviously have had a pretty distressful few days. They were extremely tired and distressed, particularly on Saturday, having had 2 nights where they had not slept and the children were unsettled. So yes, I wouldn't say it's been a easy time for them.
When was the last time you were able to talk to them?
I've spoken to them on Saturday, and I've also had contacts that obviously also speak in Tamil, also speak to them yesterday. Yeah.
What are they saying about the condition that they are in, the conditions that they are being kept in?
Look, I'm not going to say that the conditions are terrible, because I don't think they would be, because the reality is our understanding is there is no other detainees kept there. I think the issue is probably the isolation, in that we are here and they are in Christmas Island, and the logistics of that, and I guess the lack of any sort of social contact with any people, and obviously the children also don't have those people any children to associate with. All
right, let's just talk about the legal action. What is that course of action that you're taking this week?
So this week there's 2 matters running, and it relates to a decision not to refer to the Minister to consider the youngest child's claims. The youngest child has not been considered in the previous applications run to the courts, or because the child was born after they were finally determined.
What do you think the likelihood of success is?
I don't think I can comment on that yet, because we haven't seen the documents from the Minister's lawyers in response to our documents.
There have been, and it's not just the Immigration Department that has rejected the family's attempt to stay in Australia. There's also been 7 attempts in Australian courts that have also been rejected. So is there a sense that this will also be unsuccessful? What makes you think this time will be any different?
I guess in this case, the sheer amount of media attention has had, and that's for an extensive period, obviously there's been a lot over the last few days, has put them at risk that was not previously considered. But there's also, I guess, an exceptional circumstance case in this situation, in the sheer community support that it has, both within regional Australia and actually right across Australia.
But isn't it true that rules are rules, that the family arrived here, and when they did, they didn't have children at that point, but they weren't allowed then, they were put into detention straight away. So is there a sense that, you know, they haven't done the right thing, so that they should probably head back to Sri Lanka and apply in a legal way?
Well, one is whether they'd have a legal way, firstly, to apply from Sri Lanka, but secondly, there's plenty of other cases where the Minister has intervened where people haven't complied with the rules. A good example of that is the au pair cases where the Minister intervened. In those cases, they were cancellation cases, so they had not complied with the rules set within the Migration Act. So, with all due respect, I think, you know, there are cases where you can intervene, irrespective of the way that they've arrived in Australia, or what has occurred since, or what may be the government policy and legislation at the time.
Do you accept that if this family is allowed into Australia on compassionate grounds, that it throws into jeopardy the government's whole stance on immigration?
No, I don't think it does, because the reality is the law at the minute states that if you arrive by boat, you're not even entitled to have your application processed in Australia. You would only go to an offshore processing centre. That hasn't changed. It doesn't mean that there needs to be a softening, seen as a softening. It's an exceptional case, and that's what we're trying to highlight as being different.
Have you suggested to at least the father anyway to return to Sri Lanka and possibly go to the consulate in Sri Lanka and apply to become a refugee here in a legal way?
Look, it's not, the process isn't quite as simple as doing that. And, I mean, given the Minister's comments, I don't know that that would be processed in that way. Plus, when you are on shore, the legislative process is very different.
Could his family, I mean, it's true that the family does have a lot of sympathy, but the government does have, you know, a policy in place where, you know, one has to apply to all. Could the father's family at least sponsor him? Is that an option for him to be sponsored, and then potentially that he could return in a legal way that way?
Well, no, it's not, because there's no visa category that they currently meet that they could apply for offshore.
So what are you hoping that comes out of this week? I mean, is it a couple of days? Is it the full week? I mean, how much longer is the family expected to stay on Christmas Island for?
Well, that's a difficult thing for me to answer yet, because it does depend on how long the court process takes. I assume that they will remain. I mean, the injunction's in place till 4 p.m. Wednesday, and it will depend on what occurs on Wednesday and whether that injunction is extended.
All right. OK, that's all the time we've got for. But Karina Ford, I really appreciate your time this morning, and best of luck this week.
No problems. Thank you very much.